So we're traveling through the beautiful city, and these are our engineers. They look super happy, but actually they're super unhappy. And this is Bob. Bob's whole world is telling us no. Request denied. And this is our boss, and he's unhappy too because everything is just going too slowly.
And just like the boss, the stakeholders are all really unhappy and worried about the business.
And then randomly this girl whispers in the boss's ear, DevOps. And then the boss has this amazing idea on how to save the business with DevOps. Hey everyone, we're going to do DevOps. And then everyone's like, oh my god, DevOps, we're going to do DevOps. And then the partners are like, yes, they are doing DevOps. And then the partner sends somebody to offer a DevOps package. And then the boss is like, I am blind and have money, please lead me. And the partners are like, please take us to the future. Using the magic of animation, we accelerate time. And the boss flies in like a hero because of the DevOps. What a success. Now our partners can fly because of the DevOps. Away with the money, so they can go home and wash their dirty cash. Don't take my intro too seriously. Partners can absolutely help your organization, but they can also become part of the furniture. Essentially, don't forget to focus on building lasting capability.
I'm Aubrey Stearn, and let's put the T in CTO. So I did that thing again where I picked a title and now I have to backfit the content to match that title. So this talk really is a giant hodgepodge of content. 30 minutes isn't a lot of time to impart all of the wisdom of digital transformation. That said, we're still learning and transforming ourselves. We figure out what does and doesn't work at scale. There is no one-size-fits-all model, playbook or package, and the key to success is organic growth led by experienced practitioners, but ensuring there's suitable commitment to weaving a new tapestry of capability into your firm. Getting the job done is one thing, but creating capability is really where you want to be. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore topics around the theme of being successful with transformation and DevSecOps as a critical enabler. We're going to look at the digital annex as a strategy today, the topic stop saying developers, cottage industries as an anti-pattern, the steel thread versus the lean startup, why financial services are a different beast compared to other sectors, and finally some story time, my thoughts on creating something special. On the subject of transformation, even the word implies there is an end, and I would suggest that really our goal here is to build a continuous engine for change and evolution. One of the first strategies or paths to digital transformation is the digital annex. Usually this comes about after some sort of discovery, possibly even an initial attempt to implement change, whereby the creation of a micro-org is proposed, devoid of barriers and controls the heritage organization has protected itself with. It's also free of folks who don't think it will work. Everyone in here is all in and enthusiastically going to make this thing work. The challenge with the digital annex is front-loading of progress, and in an unrealistic and unsustainable way. And what I mean by this is that while it's true that building without legacy governance and program controls is fast, you'll still need to work through some of these processes at the end. And often these corporate dances can soak up some excessive amount of time. I'm really trivializing the value of controls and governance here, and we're going to add a little detail and spice to that later on. The annex provides you with the raw firepower to deliver a campaign of shock and awe. Momentum, if you will. You might indeed have a singing, dancing thing really quickly. You hope with the momentum created in the first part of the campaign that you can smash through the resistance in part two. And all too often we're overwhelmed and have no choice but to conform to the lurking process that is the tail of the dragon. If you attempt the digital annex, make sure that you engage with the heritage organization early and often. Take them along on the journey. Understand the longer form dance required not just to get something live, but to get users using that thing. Governance might not be fit for purpose, and mutually security controls might also be outdated. So getting a head start on modernization can only be a good thing and help provide your initiative with a soft landing with some early day supporters and champions. Neglecting these things is a little like leaving rust on your car. It's going to cost a ton when you finally try and fix it. The NB of the digital annex lies in financial services. Because of the risk counterbalance provided by material risk takers, they're perfectly placed and entitled to move at a pace they're comfortable with. Shock and awe won't work and likely will exacerbate maybe an already challenging situation. Rather than using momentum and the wow factor, assurance is a far more powerful tool. If you can provide faster and more accurate visibility into the current adoption of risk controls, it's a no-brainer to sign up. I don't want to spoil the fun this early in the video, so I'm going to save this for a little chat about financial services later. Next up is stop saying developers. I hear this a lot when folks are involved in DevOps or DevSecOps. It reminds me of the operations development divide that we're trying to overcome with the DevSecOps movement. How about we just use engineering instead? Back in the day when sysops was a thing, some of you may remember working with NetworkKit directly. Maybe some of those really cool switches with ASICs or application-specific integrated circuits, even FPGAs known as field programmable gate arrays for super high performance custom network applications. Where am I going with this, right? Okay, so when we all packed up our stuff and went to the cloud, we traded out the complexity of working with NetworkKit, setting up jumbo packet support for the simplicity of defining our requirements, having the resources supplied, and meeting said requirements. In this trade, we handed back the complexity and we got a couple of really great ways to declaratively provision the resources we need, just like magic. And when we do that, we write code. On AWS, we can use CloudFormation. On Azure, we can use ARM or the Azure Resource Manager. Finally, with GCP, we can use Deployment Manager. Now, all of these tools have the latest and greatest support from each of their respective developers, but there is an alternative, and I would confidently say of all tools, it has the most traction, and this tool is Terraform by HashiCorp. What's crazy magical about Terraform is the providers. One language, HCL or HashiCorp configuration language, and using those providers, you can provision on GCP, AWS, Azure, Allian known as Alibaba Cloud, Oracle Enterprise Cloud, IBM Cloud, but there's more. We can also create GitHub resources, Akamai resources, Cloudflare, F5 Big IP, Elasticsearch, MongoDB, Trello, and Tumblr. Let me give you a scenario where this is really cool. You get to take your security to the next level. Imagine we're developing a React website and we're going to use the standard CloudFront CDN on AWS with an S3 origin and S3 access identity. Super standard. But now we have to get our compiled React site into S3. And this is where things get really cool. We can create an IAM with the permissions we need to deploy, generate those credentials, and by using the GitHub provider, we can add them as a secret to our site repository, ready for GitHub Actions to consume. Amazing. We didn't even touch the credentials, and now it's super easy and foolproof to taint and regenerate those credentials. Serious DevSecOps thinking. We've done some declarative resource provisioning, which is developed right and proper, and the way you work with these clouds is via their software development kits, CLIs. I want to throw two more scenarios at you where I hope I can convince you should be putting more time into your development depth. The first is way back when. I remember adding some cache behavior to CloudFront and then applying them in a totally random order, which, if you know cache behaviors, you really don't want that to happen. A little check in the code showed that at the time it was using an unordered list rather than an ordered one. Useful to know, although someone had to beat me to the punch raising the issue on GitHub. The second is thinking about my time at Nationwide Building Society, building the digital platform. Our approach was to build everything as code, a platform from a single repository, and a test suite to match. We needed a huge amount of automation and some tests, like being able to deploy a container via a manifest and ensure something was running or rejected, that could only be validated by pulling the logs from the K8s cluster. Luckily, the platform was built by a team of incredibly talented developers, so building a solution to these challenges wasn't a problem. Still, if we'd have created a DevOps silo using pipeline folks and SysOps folks, the chances are we wouldn't have been able to fulfill the platform vision that we'd committed to. The ability to code gives you the freedom to create, and I don't think that the value of that can be understated. Reaching the midway topic, now let's touch on cottage industries. What is a cottage industry? Well, a cottage industry is a small-scale, decentralized manufacturing business. How does it apply to DevSecOps? Jenkins. That's right. Loved, hated, staple of our community. Jenkins is the Swiss Army knife of pipeline and build server tools, and that's essentially the problem. It does too much. You need to actually put this thing somewhere, and I only really want to worry about things like that for my applications. Many folks still run farms with Jenkins slaves, and with the complexity and scalability, you end up creating a small cottage industry of people whose entire world is keeping Jenkins running. Starve the fire, I say. Let it burn itself out. The better options are to look at tools like CircleCI, GitHub Actions, and Azure DevOps, all of which have beautiful declarative language to define your pipeline, support building in Docker containers rather than on some server that you need to maintain, and this is real cattle not pets thinking. What makes these solutions great and simple is that there isn't anything to run. With GitHub Actions, you just push the right config file and off a build will go. With CircleCI, you can connect it to your GitHub repository and it's away. And with Azure DevOps, there's a little more fiddling to do, but largely you still have the benefits of keeping your build config with your source code, which, if you think about it, massively lowers the barrier of entry for inexperienced developers getting involved in the development process. We should always strive to reduce complexity where we can, so folks can get more involved and increase their breadth of skill. There's no value wasting your life running servers, supporting cottage industries, because the value creation is really where it's at. And that's really what this stuff is about. There are tons of lower friction, easy to use, zero barrier of entry tools that simply do the job better. The message here is that we should all strive to adopt an N-shaped rather than T-shaped pattern as engineers. And while T-shape is honestly a great shape and still has a fantastic story, having those multiple vertical depths with M-shaped and being able to dig deep on multiple practices is going to be an epic contribution to any team, a true master of discourse and empathy in any group. Let's talk about false idols in the steel thread versus the lean startup. The steel thread, or the tracer bullet, is generally a small pathfinding exercise to deliver or accomplish some sort of value while learning about the process required to actually achieve that value in the real world. For the sake of example, let's say you work in a big bank and you want to move faster than your competitors. As a senior management function owner, you hear about how governance slows things down. Security says no to everything. It takes longer than the dinosaurs existed to release new features, and you're fed up. So you hire a snazzy new management consultancy company to lead you to the promised land and help you get bigger, stronger, and faster. I want to reach back and remind you about the digital annex and the shock and awe technique. Without being clear about what we want to know, there is a chance that this technique will be employed, and we might build something really cool, but it will all slow down in the end, and we don't learn anything meaningful about change at scale or the true cost of the process. What I'd be looking to extract from the exercise are the following. Who are the stakeholders? So who's involved? And who are the stakes? Who's committed? Who has skin in the game? And when we build this thing, how do we get this thing live? What are the restrictions around the thing, either regulatory or internal? For example, does the system of record have to remain on-premise rather than in the cloud? Is getting something live different from getting something live and having real customers use it? And how much difference is there? And are there scales hidden within those restrictions? What does unacceptably bad look like? What's a worst case scenario for these folks? Seeking forgiveness rather than permission is fine unless you've just done the unforgivable. What does the current internal capability look like? Technical capabilities aside, who's excited to do this? Are there existing antibodies ready to attack us as a foreign body? Antibodies are a funny old concept. A large organization often mimics the human body in the sense that it can get sick, recover, grow, and injure itself. It can also generate antibodies if it perceives that it's being attacked internally. Building a digital annex without the bilateral feedback loop into the host organization is a surefire way to trigger the antibody response, which will only make your life much harder and reduce your chances of success. If I try to condense what I'm saying here, it's really to think about the kind of things you can figure out from an exercise like this. To borrow some startup style thinking, there is a genuine chance that by missing all the metrics required to build a full picture, that you can't build a realistic sense of the challenge that you face, and that the viability or commerciality of the endeavor just might not add up. The lean startup talks about vanity metrics and actionable metrics. I'd say that external folks joining your organization and building software faster is a vanity metric. Existing folks building software, however long that takes, is closer to an actionable metric. The book gives a great example of launching a new service and then handing out vouchers for a discount for the first order. What happens here is you end up with a hyperinflated initial user base with no real measures of demand for your service. Effectively, although your numbers look great, you haven't really learned anything about product fit, price point, etc. The danger is that you end up investing more into a business model that might lack clear commercial viability. Financial services or regulated businesses pose a different challenge compared to most firms that are unregulated. I'm going to focus on the UK in this part of the talk, as not only is that where I hail from, but it's also where I understand the regulations with the most depth. Now, this is a huge topic and we can go really deep, but there isn't a lot of time, so I'll try and compress what makes financial services and indeed all regulated environments so interesting. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, also known as BCBS, was established way back in 1974, formed by central bank governors of the Group of 10 or G10 countries, in the aftermath of several disturbances of the international currency and banking markets, notably the Bankhaus Herstatt in West Germany. The Group of 10 comprises of 11 countries, Belgium, Canada, France and Germany, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and finally the United States. The goal was to enhance the financial stability by improving the quality of banking supervision worldwide. The Basel Committee has grown to stand at 45 institutions from 28 jurisdictions. Basel's most notable publications are the Basel 1, 2, and 3 Accords on capital adequacy. Essentially, these accords contain recommendations on the capital to risk asset ratios. At European level, the recommendations were incorporated into CRD, or the Capital Requirements Directive. Currently, CRD 1, 2, 3, and 4 exist. CRD 5 is currently open for consultation, and that consultation is due to end on September the 30th, 2020. It remains to be seen how much influence COVID-19 will have on that. Once a directive is published by the EBA or the European Banking Authority, it's down to the respective regulators to implement that in local law via the regulator. In the UK, that would fall to the PRA, or the Prudential Regulation Authority, and the FCA, which is the Financial Conduct Authority. I think if my memory serves me correctly, material risk takers as a concept was introduced into Pillar 3 of the Basel II Accord. However, guidance on how to identify material risk takers by the EBA has only been recently shored up. Material risk takers are folks that work for an institution who can materially impact or influence the risk profile of the firm. Once again, you'll be asking yourself, how is this important? And what does it have to do with technology and DevSecOps? So a lot of folks will approach change and transformation as a technology challenge, and anyone who doesn't want to get with that is a dinosaur. So here's the bit I left out about material risk takers. Depending on their remuneration, their bonuses are delivered in linked instruments. Think shares. In addition, a proportion of that bonus is deferred over several years, sometimes up to 8. They're also subject to malus and clawbacks, with malus being applied before awards or remuneration have been vested or paid. Think about it as a downward adjustment of the bonus if you want. Clawbacks are applied to awards and remuneration that have already been vested or paid. Now, you can understand why these folks might be risk adverse or unwilling to embrace our strategy of failing fast and using it as a learning opportunity. Really doubling down on this, what these folks are looking for is assurance. These organizations will have control frameworks and risk frameworks that are designed to capture and highlight and mitigate these risks. The material risk taker will traditionally seek assurance from second line risk and ultimately third and fourth. For more information on this topic, I have a video on my YouTube channel that explains the 3 lines of risk defense in more detail. If you can sit through another video of me talking, or you can just Google it. Getting back to the subject of assurance, if you can offer a continuous view of how much of those control frameworks you've met and stay in open dialogue with second line risk, getting buy-in from the MRT is going to be much easier. Their language is risk and our language is technology, and what we need to do is apply technology to risk. Again, in my video in Regulated DevSecOps, I talk on a technology solution to solving this challenge. Lastly, let's talk about the time that I built a digital platform with a team of outstanding individuals for the world's largest building society. NDAP, or the Nationwide Digital Accelerator Platform, started life as your run-of-the-mill, cloud-based digital journey initiative. That obviously meant that when 2 distinct journeys existed, there was commonality in terms of the cloud-native services consumed by the journey, but not parity, and thus the concept of a digital platform was born, the utopia of one platform that runs all journeys. I don't want to turn this last section into a strategy debate, but I do think the notion of one common platform isn't the best approach. If you can build something, more importantly, provision a new instance of your platform and quickly deploy and cut traffic over to it, I think it's a smarter, lower risk strategy than building another big brittle thing that makes it hard to change the underlying configuration without further risk of destructive actions. Blue-green or red-black deployments are great for significant infrastructure changes in the cloud. At code level, we can use feature flags the rest of the time. Let's touch on the strategy we used building NDAP. Initially, we had a dedicated support function and 2 distinct teams. If anyone's ever worked in support, you'll know that probably you gain the greatest knowledge from problem solving than being anywhere else. What was really apparent was the strongest engineers actually worked on support full time. So one of the first changes I made was to move the folks on support into the squad lead positions and fold everybody else into squads of 5. The next was dealing with the dramatic shift away from 2 big lumps of engineers to smaller squads. So we sent those folks off to the pub for a day with an artist to bond with their Scrum Masters and the Agile coaches, as well as work on their squad values and naming their squads and dreaming up their logos. We ended up with Quantum, Mavericks, the Blue Knights, Lighthouse, the Guerreros, Dovetail, and Argo. The best names not chosen were Back to the Feature and the Kubernators. This gave everybody a sense of team and family, which I believe is important when we're asking folks to care about something. We sometimes fuse squads together for more capability, so Quantum and the Blue Knights became the Quantum Knights, for example. What's great about NDAP was that we didn't breach Dunbar's number of 150. We ended up somewhere between a clan and a tribe, which I think is a sweet spot for keeping strong relationships in a large-scale team. Our Scrum Masters were asked to organically support the teams with organisation, but to let them do the lion's share of work on deciding how things would work and if there were any ceremonies they would run. The only ceremonies that we ran were walking the roadmap so we could discuss any changes prior to planning. Group planning would take place after that, and we would all circle back later in the day to make sure everyone knew what every squad was doing and had committed to. It was also a good opportunity to talk about any toil that had built up. Retrospectives. So some teams would work through this individually to work through any issues they had at group level. However, I've always been on the edge about being at the retro. I try to stay away and get updates from whoever ran the sessions. I think it's essential that folks feel like they have zero judgment, safe space to talk about team changes and adjustments, and that might include how I work with the team or how the team would like to work with me. Finally, reflection, which is my favorite part of NDAP. I would give a theme or an introduction to the day and probably a few boxes of donuts, and then I'd hand over to the teams. The idea of reflection was to have all 7 squads present to the business the value of their work and to the other squads, and sometimes visitors from the rest of the business. It would also give them a chance to demo their work, and we would bring consumers of the platform in so they could get a head start on adopting new features and hearing from the squads that built their requests. This also gave folks who were slightly more introvert a chance to work on their presentation skills, and often Scrum Masters will make time to work on these skills with them. I personally think it's really important to help folks grow their communication repertoire and confidence, as it will really help them take their careers to the next level and present themselves in the best possible light. Let's quickly touch on my vision for the digital platform. I know from all my experience in the cloud how brittle the best intentioned infrastructure can be. So the strategy on platform was that nothing included in the infra should be long-lived with the exception of data. We and our customers should be really good at provisioning new instances of the platform and loading it up with their journeys. From there, the customers would slowly shift their traffic over to the new platform at the global traffic management layer. This would ensure that the new platform and journey instances worked as expected. Essentially, you're creating a petition. On one side, you have infrastructure changes, which is more of a provisioning, monitoring, and deployment challenge. On the opposite side, you have journey changes, and we handle those using feature flags and service mesh-based traffic splitting. My approach comes with specific drawbacks, such as complicated pipelines to check the availability of a second platform. But overall, the approach was concise and embraced the cattle, not pets mentality, allowing us to bake our guardrails into platform code and also to be able to offer up that code to an auditor at any point in time or a future point in time. Finally, as a continuation of the assurance solution, alongside the code that was digital platform, we built our own test framework. The framework allowed us to reach inside the Kubernetes cluster and understand if our tests had run successfully. It would also help us run the tests that we didn't consider dirty or that might have cascaded or affected other tests in the graph. The point was to create a state where we wove the rules into the fabric of the platform code, and we wrote tests to prove that they work in the test framework. An example of this might be using the Open Policy Agent Admission Controller to prevent Docker images being pulled from untrusted registries. We would bake the policy into our platform code, and then we would write a test to try and deploy a manifest that contained an image from Docker Hub. The framework would watch the logs and query the API for the deployment status looking for a failure. The underlying thought or beat we followed was that we could codify most things, and that if we had this framework and worked in a specific way, we could say that we did one thing in code and prove it continuously with the test framework. Every night we could deploy the platform and test it and get better coverage. We could also change security from an advice model to a contribution-based model, something that long-term and short-term I thought would be tangibly better for the society and far more audit-friendly. Internally, we called our platform Okroshka, and our test framework Solyanka, which are both cold Russian soups. Counterculture is a powerful tool in creating the feeling of something unique and special. And if you want, you can read a little more on the digital platform on my blog over here. Hopefully you've learned something, and hopefully you'd like to see more. So make sure you click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you know when a new video drops. One last thing, I want to thank my sponsor. Just kidding, I have a sponsor, so I'll see you next time.